There's a certain kind of man who women don't just want, they become emotionally consumed by him. It's not because he's the most attractive or the smoothest speaker. It's not because he dresses well or says the right things at the right time. It's because he embodies a quality that's almost invisible, but undeniably felt. A grounded unpredictability. He moves on his own time. He speaks with presence, not performance. His energy doesn't reach outward to grasp attention, it draws inward, pulling others toward him without trying. It's not emotionally chaotic, not unstable, not erratic, but he is unreadable in the most compelling way. He doesn't fit into emotional patterns, doesn't offer predictable responses, and that makes him linger in her mind. He doesn't respond immediately. He doesn't explain himself at every turn. He isn't absent, he's intentional. She feels him when he's near, but she can't quite define what's pulling her in. It's his mystery wrapped in calm, his presence laced with distance, his warmth balanced by restraint. And the more he doesn't try to be impressive, the more impressive he becomes. The more he stays in his own world, the more she wants to be part of it. There's no performance, no neediness, no seeking approval. He simply is. And in that being, he commands curiosity. Her mind starts to loop. Why didn't he reply yet? What does that silence mean? Why did that smile seem so restrained? Emotional addiction doesn't begin with drama. It begins with subtle dissonance. With the sense that she hasn't quite grasped him, that there's something left to uncover, and that need to understand, to decode his presence. To close the gap between what she feels and what she knows, that's what pulls her deeper. Because predictability comforts, but unpredictability captivates. And the man she can't predict becomes the one she can't stop replaying. Asterisk. She doesn't crave predictability. She craves emotional meaning. And when she encounters a man who operates from internal clarity rather than external approval, something inside her becomes activated. She starts seeking understanding. Not because you're confusing, but because you're not obvious. You're not showing every card. You're not handing her a version of yourself shaped by what you think she wants. Instead, you offer presence. Without explanation, warmth, without attachment, attention, without sacrifice. And that quiet tension, the space between what she feels and what she can confirm, begins to pull her in. You're not deliberately withholding, you're just not over-offering. You give when it feels right, not when it's expected. You're unpredictable. Not in a volatile sense, but in a deeply personal one. Your energy shifts based on your own rhythm, not hers. And that unpredictability becomes her emotional puzzle. She starts leaning in, not because you've created insecurity, but because you've created meaning that isn't immediately clear. She analyzes your pauses, replays your looks, rereads your texts. Not to find a red flag, but to find alignment. And the more she does, the more invested she becomes. That internal effort decoding who you are, tracking your energy, trying to feel closer, is the very source of emotional attachment. You didn't create confusion, you created presence layered in complexity. That complexity invites her to work for clarity. Most men remove all effort by being too available, too obvious, too mapped out. But the man who gives just enough to spark interest, yet holds enough back to stay undefined, that man becomes a journey. She stops looking for comfort and starts chasing connection. Not with someone who needs her attention, but with someone whose attention feels earned. And in that chase, that beautiful tension between known and unknown, her emotional world begins to orbit around him. Asterisk, most men are trapped in a cycle of overperformance. They think expressing more, explaining everything, and giving constant attention is the way to win her over. But that kind of emotional eagerness becomes noise. It's too easy to read, too fast to access, too quick to fade. What they don't realize is that mystery doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from depth. The man who holds back, not out of fear, but out of self-possession, becomes unforgettable. He doesn't feel the need to explain every mood or justify every silence. He's not performing for approval. He's simply living in his truth. He allows his presence to speak louder than his words. One day he might be light and playful, the next quiet and reflective. But both expressions come from the same core authenticity. And that realness, That refusal to simplify himself to fit expectations creates a powerful emotional grip. She finds herself leaning forward, paying more attention, not because he's doing anything flashy, but because he's not giving everything away. He doesn't tell her his whole story in one sitting. He lets it unfold naturally through vibe, through energy, through time. And in that slow reveal, she feels something more valuable than constant attention. She feels significance. Every moment with him matters. Every word feels chosen. Every silence has weight. He becomes the man whose presence she studies and whose distance she respects. Because it's not cold, it's composed. And that composition creates contrast. While other men are eager to fill the space, he's willing to hold it. And that stillness becomes magnetic. She doesn't chase him because he plays hard to get. She chases him because every interaction feels like a chance to discover something new. He doesn't change to keep her interested. He stays true to himself. And that truth keeps her coming back. Asterisk, when a woman meets a man she can't easily define, something shifts in the way she shows up. Subtle at first. Maybe she hesitates before texting, rephrases her message, or pauses a little longer. Before reacting, she starts thinking about her energy, not out of fear, but out of respect. She senses that this man isn't swayed by the usual games or emotional baiting. He doesn't flinch, doesn't chase when pulled away, doesn't rush in to rescue the moment when she withdraws. That kind of stillness, that emotional discipline, causes her to rethink everything. Suddenly, her usual patterns feel ineffective. The tests don't work. The drama doesn't stir a reaction. And in that vacuum of expected response, her instincts start adapting. She becomes more intentional. She listens more. She brings forward a version of herself that's less performative and more sincere. Because she understands, consciously or not, that this man isn't accessible through noise. He's accessed through depth. Every time she feels like she's beginning to understand him, he surprises her not with chaos, but with another layer of who he is. It's not that he's inconsistent, it's that he's complex. He's layered, and those layers can't be reached in one emotional sprint. They can only be felt through presence over time, and that slow uncovering becomes its own reward. She wants more not because he's withholding, but because what he gives feels earned. And in earning his presence, his words, his time, she feels valued. Most men give everything up front, hoping that full emotional exposure will make them worthy, but he doesn't. He holds his truth close, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. And that quiet protection of his energy makes her shift from wanting attention to wanting connection. From expecting answers to wanting access. And that's when the bond truly begins. Asterisk, when she can't predict you, she can't replace you. You become a rhythm she's never heard before, one she can't anticipate but deeply wants to dance to. You don't show up on a schedule. You don't offer your presence as a reward for good behavior. You move when it makes sense to you, when your mission allows space, when your energy is aligned. It's that autonomy is what makes you irreplaceable. She's used to men chasing, used to men folding under pressure, used to them reshaping themselves just to keep her interested. But you don't fold. You don't mold. You lead. You're not reactive. You're not reward-based. You don't operate out of fear or scarcity. You give when it's real, and when it's not, you stay silent. And that silence carries more weight than 1,000 texts. She feels the contrast. She notices the space, and in that space, her desire deepens. Her mind returns to you in moments of stillness. She starts replaying, revisiting, reanalyzing, not because she's confused, but because she's invested. She's emotionally accountable now. She watches her tone. She thinks before she speaks. She doesn't test. She adapts, because the usual tricks don't land with you. You're not here to win her, you're here to lead yourself. The beauty of that self-leadership is that it creates emotional gravity. You pull without reaching. You attract without effort. You affect without chasing. Every version of you is real, calm, quiet, present, distant hand. She knows that. She senses that you're not a performance. You're a presence. And that presence, unpredictable but never unstable, keeps her emotionally awake. She's no longer curious about what you'll do next. She's curious about who you really are. The more she discovers, the more she realizes that you're not the kind of man she moves on from. You're the kind she revolves around.